In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your front brakes, pads, and rotors on this Hyundai Sonata. Let's get started. With a 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. Now with the wheel off, you'll notice that there are 2 Phillips head screws holding on the rotor. To get these off, typically you'd want an impacting screwdriver. But if you don't have one, here's a trick. Take a punch or anything that you have that'll go flat on it and just give it a few taps. Do this to both. And now I actually have a screwdriver bit that goes on my air impact, but if you don't have this, at this point you could use just a regular screwdriver. However, an impacting screwdriver or this will be a lot more efficient. Let's try to unscrew these. Make sure you put a lot of pressure that way on it so that it doesn't strip out. Oh, looks like that one broke. And this one broke too. That's bound to happen, and at least they came out, because a lot of times if these don't come out, you're going to have to drill them out. They are not necessary to be reinstalled because these are only here to hold the rotor on at the factory. If you wanted to put them back on, go ahead, but they are not necessary. So for me, I will not be drilling these out and putting them back on. From the back side, let's use a 14mm and break free the 2 caliper to bracket bolts. Remove those all the way. And then with the help of a pry bar, or maybe you can just do it by hand, you can remove the whole caliper off of the bracket. There we go. We'll set this up on top of the strut. Now you can pop the pads out. Just use a pry bar, or you can maybe just pry them out by hand. Do this to both. Set those aside. And now take a 17mm socket and let's unbolt the caliper off of the knuckle. Leave one partially threaded in as you remove the second. That one I had to break free by hand because of the space limitations. Finish removing it. Okay, there's one. Hold the caliper bracket and remove the second one. There it is. And remove the caliper bracket, set it aside. Now let's remove the rotor. If it's stuck on like this one, put a lug nut back, and then we'll use a hammer and just tap it till it comes free. I recommend tapping it from the back side, that way the impacts go that way and it forcefully breaks it free. If for some reason you can't, you can tap from the front, just might take a little longer. I'm going to take a bigger hammer, tap from the front side this time. That way I can get a better swing at it. There we go. Take the safety lug nut off. This prevented it from flying off. And now you can remove your rotor. Now we have to clean up the hub surface so that the new rotor can have a nice area to mount on. And if your screws broke and protrude out, you're going to want to either drill them out, grind them flat, or remove them completely. Do whatever you have to do, but this needs to be a flat, clean surface. For me, I'm gonna take a little sanding disc and sand this down because it is kind of rough. You can use a wire brush if yours isn't this bad. Just do whatever you have to do to get this nice and clean. All right, so I'm done with the areas that I can reach. For the areas that I can't reach, I'm going to put a wire wheel on my die grinder so I can get in here, or you could use a wire brush, whatever works for you. And again, I'm not removing material off of the surface. I'm using a soft pad. I just want to get the rust off and get down to clean metal so we can then coat it and prevent further rust. Let's clean up the surface with some brake parts cleaner. And once that's done, let's apply some anti-seize to the hub. You don't need a lot, but if you just put a thin layer on, this will prevent further rust from building up. Make sure you go around this ridge in the center here. This is where the rotor can also seize up if it does. Try not to get it on the lug studs though. It's important that you don't put too much because then it'll fling out as you drive and it'll get on your rotor. Take your new rotor, and I'm gonna put it on backwards just for a second so that I can actually use some brake parts cleaner and a rag and wipe off this braking surface. You don't want any contaminants on there, whether it's oils from shipping or fingerprints of grease or whatever else might be on here. You want this nice and clean. Now flip it over and we'll do the same to this side. Now you can install it properly, and again, if you had your 2 mounting screws still, you would put those in at this point. That's nice and clean. Let's get this caliper bracket ready for installation, and to do that, first we have to pry off these anti-rattle clips. They sit on each side, and then we have to clean up this surface here. It's important that you do that, otherwise the pads will have too little room, because as it rusts, it'll actually swell up, compress, and then the pads can't slide in and out. So it's important that you get this nice and clean. To do this, you could use a wire brush, a sanding disc, whatever it takes. I have a good amount of rust here, so I'm gonna go directly for the wire wheel on my die grinder. I don't wanna directly go to the sanding disc because I don't wanna take off too much material, but this will ensure that I get this nice and clean. Okay, that looks pretty good actually, and it didn't take too long. Let's flip it over and do the other side. All right, now that we have these cleaned, let's clean the slider pins and then we'll grease everything up. To clean these, all you have to do is just pull them straight out, assuming they're not seized, of course. If they're seized, you're gonna have to pull this boot back, spray some rust penetrant, put a socket on here, try to work it back and forth and unseize it, or you might just need a new caliper bracket. It's important that these slide back and forth because as you hit the brake pedal and the caliper compresses, it needs to slide in and out to apply even pressure to both pads. So at this point, because I had good grease in there, I'm not going to worry about cleaning inside. I just cleaned this up, and I'm going to apply some new caliper grease. I'm going to put some on the inside of the boot here. This is going to do 2 different things. One, it's going to act as a reserve of grease as it gets packed in here. Don't stick it down into the bore, just put it into the boot. And it will also get on the lip of the boot here. What that's going to do is it's going to seal up on the end of the caliper slider pin here, and this will prevent water from getting in. And now we'll just add some to the slider pin itself. Not a lot, because if you put too much, it'll just get wiped off as you try to put it in on this boot. So just put a thin layer, just enough to coat it. There we go. Now slide it in. And you'll notice that there's some air built up in here. To get that out, press it down, squeeze the boot, and the air will come right out. This slides nice and smooth. Let's do the same to the other slider pin, and then we can install the caliper bracket. You'll notice that this one actually has a rubber damper on it. It's like a rubber sleeve here, and this is important that you put it back on the correct side that it came from because it serves a purpose, so you don't want it to be installed on the wrong side. We'll do the same thing here. Add some grease to the boot, add some grease to the slider, press it in, squeeze the air out, give them a couple twists to work the grease in there. And now let's add a thin layer of grease to where we cleaned up here, where the anti-rattle clips sit. You don't want too much grease because if you put too much, it'll actually get in the center here where the rotor is, and then it'll, well, get on your rotor, and that would not be good. You don't want that to have grease on it. So do both sides, and then we'll put new anti-rattle clips on. Now with that thin layer applied, grab your new anti-rattle clips and line them up. It's important that they are positioned properly and press them down. They should kind of lock into place. They should feel like they want to stay and not come off easily. If they come off easily, they're probably not lined up correctly. Okay, there we go. Press them down all the way, and now we can install this on the vehicle. Line up your caliper bracket. Start in whichever bolt lines up first. That one's started. Get the other one in as well. Let's bottom these out, and then we'll torque them to 72 foot-pounds. That's one. and 2. Now let's put the pads in. The inner pad will have a wear indicator that goes on the bottom. Line them up with the bracket, press them down and in. They should slide in smoothly. If they don't slide around easily like this, oops, that just popped out. See, that's how easy it should slide. It means you didn't clean up enough rust, and then they'll bind up as you apply the brakes, and they'll most likely get stuck in the engaged position, and well, that's not going to result in proper wear of the brakes. So make sure you clean up enough there. So let's put the outer pad in as well. This one slides in smoothly, perfect. Now let's compress the caliper piston in. As you can see, it's pretty far out and it won't fit over the new pads. To do this, I'm going to use a caliper depression tool and press it in. But first, I'm going to pop off this boot for the bleeder screw and open this up so that the fluid can come out of here instead of going back into the master cylinder, especially since I have pretty old and contaminated fluid in this brake system. So use a 10mm wrench and break this free. I'm going to aim it like this so that it doesn't get all over the caliper. We'll leave this open. I'm going to get my caliper depression tool. This is what it looks like. It's just a little piston that pushes on the piston and slowly push the caliper piston in. Of course, I have a collection bucket catching all of my fluid. You want to go as slow as you can. We'll wait for a second for fluid to naturally want to come out of here. Looks like it is. Okay, fluid's coming out. Close this up. Make it nice and snug. Clean up the mess. This is optional, but you can put a thin layer of grease on the outer ring of the piston of the caliper. Sometimes this can help with noise, but it's not mandatory. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But if you're going to, also apply it to the 2 ears of the piston here so that it can do the same thing on the other side pad. Almost forgot the cover. That's very important. Now get the caliper, slide it over. Make sure it lines up with the 2 slider pins, and let's put the bolts in. We'll bottom these out and then torque them to 26 foot-pounds. And 2. Let's put the wheel back. Put back all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 80 foot-pounds. .80 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Perfect. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.